Hey guys, and welcome back to another video with me, Remington Cooney, mindfulness coach and meditation teacher from the Tao of Now. Today we're going to talk about the third task, stop and ride the wave. I really love this task. In fact, I think it's probably my favorite task because it reminds me of a story that I'd like to tell. The story is about surfing. Have you ever been surfing before? It's not so easy. I actually, growing up in Singapore, was an extreme sports athlete in my teenage years. I was not professional, maybe like a good amateur, going into a professional arena of rollerblading. Aggressive inline skating was what it was originally called back in the day, and I know that sounds really cool, but yeah, I was an extreme sports athlete. I was really into rollerblading, like stunt rollerblading, the half pipes, you name it, I was doing it. And I was also pretty into skateboarding. I did a lot of snowboarding later on when I moved to Canada. So I was really into extreme sports and quite a natural at these things. And so when I moved back to Australia from Singapore, I wanted to get back to my Australian roots. And one way I wanted to do that was to start surfing. So, you know, I'm at university and I sign up for this surf camp and I go along with my friends and I think surfing, yeah, it's a balanced sport, it's an extreme sport, no problems, I'll be good at this. And I get there, you know, first day of surfing, and I paddle in. And I suddenly find that I'm actually not a great surfer at all. I mean, I know it takes time to develop skills in any sport, but right from the get-go, surfing and we were at loggerheads. I mean, I just remember going in this surf camp and paddling into these waves and just getting absolutely smashed. And all it did was raise this adrenaline in me to be like hyper competitive and be like, I'm going to get this sport down. I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn how to surf today and I'm going to be good at it today. And so right there and then, I really was trying to take control of the situation, much like I would have tried to take control of any other extreme sport. When it's a mind over matter, you try and dominate the sport by taking control. What I didn't realize at the time is surfing is not like other sports. It's not about taking control. In fact, it's actually about letting go of control. Much of the success in surfing is about stopping, letting go, and then learning to ride the wave. And this has a lot to do with this third task, stopping and riding the wave. And I'm going to tell you how. When you're out there on the ocean, you really have to tune in surfing into what Mother Nature is doing. You have to bear witness and behold the rhythms of the ocean, how they're flowing, and not to fight them, but to learn to go with the flow with those waves. I mean, I'm still not a great surfer by any means, but I'm starting to learn here in Bali how to do it. And I'm also watching people who are really good at it and talking with them, and what they say is you stop, you take time to bear witness, behold the ocean, and then when you can feel in synchronicity, in harmony with what the ocean's doing, that's when you ride the wave. Meditation practice isn't so different. We're going to have a lot of emotions coming up in meditation practice. Rather than trying to control those emotions and trying to fix them and put them into situations that we want, we really have to stop and ride the wave of emotion. And this third task is really investigating how we do that. So the irony is when we stop trying to control our action and we really allow ourselves to be open and to feel what's going on, we open up ourselves as a vessel to allow something greater to move into us and help us harmonize with whatever's occurring in that moment. This is actually what it means to surrender to something that's greater than us. Now, this wasn't necessarily a teaching of the Buddha. This was more a teaching of the ancient Chinese sages, known as the Taoist sages. They spoke of the greater path as the Tao, and that we could, by opening ourselves up as a vessel, allow the Tao to enter into us, and for us to flow with the Tao. In fact, they had a Chinese term for this, and it was called Wu Wei. When someone's acting in Wu Wei, it means that they are in a sort of effortless effort, a flow with life, a flow with nature, and they're allowing the Tao to come in and move through them so that they can perform actions that otherwise they wouldn't really be able to perform. I think in surfing, it's a lot about wu wei. It's about opening yourself up to Mother Nature and allowing her to move you as long as you're in surrender and in synchronicity. You still have to have the skills, you still have to do the work, but it's not so much about cognitive control, it's more about surrender, opening up, stopping and riding the wave. So how do we do this in our meditation practice? Well, the third task is very much like replacing the surfboard with our feeling states. Let me explain that. Our feeling states are very complicated processes. We try to understand them by analyzing them with logic, digging into them, and we tend to overanalyze these complex layers that exist within us. Eventually, they end up like mind snags. You know how the mental processes that I was talking about sort of loop over and over and over again and eventually become very entangled and we can't think our way out? Feeling states also become entangled, but they really become entangled as energetic knots in the body. They sort of get locked into the body. You know, when you're having a lot of anxiety, it gets locked in as tension. If you're having depression, it might get locked in as tension in the shoulders or something like this. So our body sort of stores these feeling states as knots. If we stop in meditation practice from analyzing these feeling states and we just bring our breath to them, over time, the breath sort of massages the feeling states and they unravel. These knots unravel and we feel a sense of expansion and buoyancy in the body. Now, not all our feeling states are bad. Some of our feeling states in the body are actually really, really good. So it's important in this practice of the third task to also stop and ride the wave of good feeling states. We do this in the same way as working with negative feeling states or unpleasurable feeling states. We go in, find a pleasurable feeling state in the body, and just allow our breathing to permeate that, to expand it, to allow it to grow. The Buddha talked about feeling states bottlenecking through something he called Vedana. That every feeling we have bottlenecks through either a pleasure filter, a filter of displeasure or unpleasurable, and a filter of neutrality. So pleasurable, not pleasurable, neutral. Every feeling goes through this bottleneck. And our job as observers in the meditation process is to really see that these feeling states are not necessarily our own identity, to once again stand back and just behold the feeling state so that it can play out and unravel from the knot that it might be causing in you. This all sounds probably pretty etherical at this point, or this all sounds probably pretty abstract at this point. But when you're in the practice itself, it becomes quite illuminated. And it can be quite a profound process to not have to do anything with your feelings other than stop and ride them out. So just to recap, I was saying that feeling states bottleneck between three places, or they bottleneck through Vedana, which can be one of three things: pleasure, displeasure, neutrality. Or really, actually, I should say, pleasure, neutrality, displeasure, right? In that order. So every feeling state that comes through has this sort of filter. Think of them like Instagram filters, you know? Is one contemporary way maybe to think of it. That we have this pleasure filter, we have this neutral filter, and this unpleasurable or displeasure filter. Okay? So everything going through those. Now, in everyday life, we don't really see this process play out. All we know is we get triggered by something. Let's use traffic for an example. You're riding around. I ride a motorbike here in Bali. Plenty of times when someone cuts me off and suddenly, you know, I'm fearing for my life. I'm like, holy shit, like you cut me off, like there's, you know, I get triggered, there's emotions that come up. I'm certainly not feeling pleasure. I'm feeling displeasure in that moment. And when that happens, there is an instant habitual response or an instant habitual reaction. And in this case, when you're feeling something displeasurable, it's really, in this case, when you're not feeling any pleasure, the instant reaction might be anger, or it might be sadness, or it might be something negative. Now, what the practice of the third task, stopping and riding the wave, can help us with is to widen a gap between a trigger point So that which triggers the initial emotion and the way that we respond. Normally it's quite instantaneous. Trigger, reaction. That's the habit. Through a breathing practice of noticing our feeling states, we cultivate, as I was talking about earlier in the previous videos, a sense of non-reactivity. Because we can watch the feeling state, label it, observe it, write it out without necessarily taking action. When we can do this, we widen the gap between that which triggers the emotion and the way that we want to respond. The wider this gap, the more choice we have in cultivating an appropriate response. You remember the Zen tale I was telling you. So we want to be able to respond to each moment appropriately, and the wider the gap, the more possibility we have in doing this. This gap between trigger and response is what I call the buffer zone. And we as meditators are aiming to build the buffer zone. We're building a buffer between that which causes us pain, pleasure, neutrality, and the way that we want to react, so that we can constantly make wise, skillful choices in response to each action-reaction in life. Eventually, over time, the ability to notice what you're reactive to and to not react to it in a habitual way allows you to watch the rise of an emotion and the fall of an emotion with a sense of non-reactivity. Now, it's not to say that I'm teaching you how to become emotionless. Really, I'm stressing the fact that you're learning how to respond to your emotions in a way that you would like to, as opposed to a way that you've been habituated to. Do you see the difference? So as we're riding this wave of the emotion with the breathing, we can actually cultivate, we can actually watch a cessation of reaction. And the Buddha called this cessation, this stopping of reaction, nirodha. So when nirodha is really mastered, that is the beginning of true contentment. So to sum up on this third task, we are stopping and riding the wave of our feeling states by observing how these feelings move through Vedana, pleasure, neutral, displeasure. And just observing that without getting engaged in the storyline behind the feeling, because it's the storyline that drags us into the undercurrent of the surf. Really, we want to stay on the wave and ride it out. The more non-reactive we are to our habitual storylines behind those feelings, the more that we are able to observe that feeling rise and pass with the breath without necessarily getting so involved. And when we can do that, we widen the gap, build a buffer zone, and respond appropriately to certain triggers in our lives. This is how the third task of stopping and riding the wave works. But obviously, like all the other tasks, to really practice this, we need to be in meditation, sitting still, noticing the rising and falling of feelings, observing them contracting and expanding in the body, and staying with the breath or the anchor point all the way through.